Morning, everyone. Big 10. They have to add themselves. Leaders can't add, but they can add themselves. Just join the group. They can't mark attendance. You mark attendance. Correct. Well, unless you're an admin now. Maybe you're an admin. Admins can do that across all the groups, but leaders of a group cannot add a person. Just leaders. And Jennifer's just leader. All right, don't forget that, and if you go to your group and you view the group, if you're in this group already, view the group, go to resources. Under resources, you'll see various resources. It's a good name for it. Various resources. All right. So we're in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 4. I'm kidding with you. Thank you, Becky. Thank you. Don't ask me. So go to your. I'm sorry. That's right. Good for you. So go to small groups. Go to small groups. And then look for this study. You'll see Genesis study, and you click join group. Now you might already be a member of it, and if you are a member, yes, ma'am. Do you see it? Do you see a join group? Now you're part of the group. Now, if you want to view it, you can. You can click view, and there's a little drop down menu. It should say like messages and resources. If you click resources, then you'll see links I have put to books and videos you can watch that are real worth your time. That's exactly right. That's the problem right there. Okay. Any other questions about the app or Genesis? No, thank you. Any other questions about that? I was struck again this week when it says that God made this in Genesis 1:14 when he says when he makes the lights in the space of the skies for day and night, there will be for signs and for appointed times for days and years. That for signs, it really struck me again how true that is, and it unlocks so much in the Old Testament. Hey, Bonnie, you feeling better? Good. Uh, it unlocks so much in the Old Testament because in the Old Testament they assume this. So you go to Amos, for example, and he talks about God's judgment, or Isaiah to Babylon, and he says that the moon will be turned to blood, the sun will be turned to darkness. And I've heard this before through the years. It just reminded me when I was younger, and well, how would God do that? And they start getting astrophysical evidence of, well, an eclipse would do it. That they start making modern scientific stuff, and that's completely outside of what an ancient person would have thought. They're not thinking how if the sun literally were to stop shining and everything went dark, I mean, the earth would go to sub-zero freezing. It would kill everything on earth. I mean, it would just be devastating. The point is, that's not how they're seeing it. It's a bright thing up there that God will use to show to humans signs of whether he's displeased with them or not. Does that make sense? It's just for signs. It's objects he can use that as well. And it just makes sense of a lot of texts when you read it that way and understand it that way. Okay, any questions or comments? We were on day 6. We were talking about humans being created in the image of God. Any questions about, we're going to pick up there, day 6. Any questions or comments so far? Okay, so we're in Genesis chapter 1, verse 26 and following, when he says, let's make human image and so forth. Okay, let me do a little bit of review to remind yourself. So, for example, image of God or image, when an ancient person heard image, they thought what we would call, well, even that, they thought of a thing. They thought of a thing, an idol. When we think idols, because it's church language, we think oftentimes a metaphor for something we might worship. which is fine. But they thought of a thing, an object they would put in their house, or you go to the temple to pay homage toward. And so that thing, that statue of the god, represented the essence of the god. It's as if you went, imagine these objects being radioactive. And the only reason they're radioactive is because they've been near the god. And how do you know that thing is of God? Can't you feel it? Can't you feel that aura? It's radioactive. It's, oh, that's right, because it has the presence of blank, Baal, or later the Greeks and one of them Zeus or whomever. And so the essence of the God is in that object. And so it's an that object is a constant reminder that that God is present and is demonstrating uh, his or hers, the God's, his or hers authority over that district, that region. And so you want to be real nice to that image because the essence of the deity is in it, and that's why they would give food and fruit and wine and liquor uh, to redheads. I mean, to the idols. That was for red. And so they would do these things because why? Because the God's essence is in that thing. And also why you would even pour oil on maybe the idol's feet, so forth. It's quite similar to the way modern Hindus treat their gods, Ganesh and Vishnu and Shakti, and they're different, and they treat red all the time. And they're little at home, and they get prana, their holy food they set aside just for the gods. And so if you went to different cities and different you saw idols of the same god, like Baal, who was the Canaanite or Ugaritic god, and Baal shows up in the Old Testament as well. If you're from the South, you say Baal. It's Baal, it means Lord or ruler, master. And so Baal, you might have Baal, or even better yet, because we have a lot of examples of this, of his lover, his consort called Asherah. And so we have little figurines of Asherah. She had multiple breasts, and the idea is that she was fecund. She was the god of fertility. And so we have little Asherah idols, images all over the place in the ancient world. And the idea is that that God's essence is almost fragmented to all the different places. And so my analogy I gave, it's not the same, but like it, that is the American flag. Now, we don't think something's in the American flag, but it represents, much like if you were to go to an American embassy in Cairo. So once you're on property, you're in the property. And so if you kill a soldier there, it's like you've done something in America. You've declared war or whatever. You've done something bad against America because you're an American property. What's kind of like that. And how would you know? Well, we got a big flag and it says embassy. Well, they did that with idols and images. So that's all well and good. And it's not so much that the idol is a physical representation, like the gods look like that, though that's certainly possible. It's much more like the essence is there, and that's why I like the word radioactive. Its presence is there. Now, and this is then okay. Well, who can be the image of God? Well, Mesopotamians talk about their sons being in the image of their fathers. Yeah, but they don't speak of humans created in the image of God. So Mesopotamians do not speak of humans in the image of God. The Egyptians did. The Egyptians said that humans can be in the God's images. They came from God's body, literally from his body. They had a very physical, we might say, biological link. But in Mesopotamia and others, the main place is the kings. So the different cultures had different ways of thinking about being in the image of someone, the image of someone. But the main thing is, if you really had to get down to it, the main thing is back to the essence of the gods ruling over. And so typically associated with the kings. And so again, idols represented the gods ruling over or governing or subduing the territories. And what stands out in Genesis, of course, is in 128 is all people have that capacity. So in Jewish theology, and therefore the same true later in Christian theology, that is, when you see a person walking around, you're seeing a walking image of God. That's the idea. Now, who cares? Well, they care because, as we see here in this particular text, is only humans are made in God's image versus crocodiles and birds and fish of the sea, or to be specific, how they use birds and creeping things and insects. So God makes other, Bayahamet, it doesn't matter the Hebrew, living creatures. So humans are living creatures, just like insects are living creatures. We're all related as biological creatures. We're all animals to some degree. Of course we are. Especially Dustin. He's a man. He's an animal. You ought to see him in the gym. So we're all animals, but Genesis would say, but only one kind of animal of all the animals, of all the living creatures, it says literally in Hebrew, that God created, has a particular function to rule over the other animals and subdue the territories. And he said that is humankind. And that's the overall point. And so when you see us, you represent people who should be in charge of creation. Not because we rule over it on our own. It's not an independent rulership. It's much more like a stewardship. That is, at no time does creation becomes, it's not, creation doesn't become humans. It's always God's. But the idea is that we become the people, he says, okay, I'll let you rule over these animals. I will give you that authority. I will grant it to you. Okay. Let me pause here for a second because I'm talking about the image of God. Any questions about that? Or comments? So, well, David, does that, well, I thought image of God meant we're made because we're moral creatures. I've heard this in sermons and there's so many books on this topic. I thought it meant it's because we're made to have relationship or made to be moral or made to be, those things are all probably true. That is to say, what does it mean to have the essence of God in us? Well, it's sure, we're relational, we're moral, we have consciousness. All those things are true. It just seems to me that's not the point. Instead, it seems to me the author of Genesis is arguing one chief thing, and it's this. God's capacity as ruler is in you and me. The function of God as ruling over something is in you and me. So at minimum, that's the point. The mechanism, he didn't tell us. The minute, that's it. And so, yeah, we have reason. Yeah, we have conscious self-awareness. That's all great. But I think the point is, that's it. Okay. So, and he says, be fruitful, multiply, which, of course, in Hebrew is not so much a commandment as it is a sense of you can fill up the space, right? So fish fill up the space of the sea. The birds fill up the space in the sky, the heavens, as it says in Hebrew, the skies. And then humans fill up the space of all the land with other animals, except they're the boss of the animals, and they're the boss of the trees, and so forth. So have a lot of children, populate the earth, sure, but the point is you have permission to fill up the space. It's not a moral duty. You have to have a baby. And if you don't, you're a sinner and you're not a human. You stop being a human if you don't have a baby. No more than, what if a human goes unconscious? We have a coma. Whoop, not human. You're not ruling over an animal. Every single time a human goes to sleep, you stop being human. Because you went to sleep, you stopped ruling over insects. You're asleep. Well, you're still a human. The point is, you have the capacity for it, right? Because you are human. So it doesn't mean you don't have to be doing it that second, exercising it that second. Humans in general have the capacity to bear children. That's the point. Doesn't mean you're being immoral when you sleep because you're not ruling over an insect, no more than you're being immoral if you don't have a baby. You have the capacity, and that's your role, to fill up the earth and then subdue it. Not destroy it, nor worship it, the creation, but in that sense, take over. Other thing that stands out from last week, I'm going to emphasize this and move on because I got here at the very end of last week, the very, very end of it, that is, in the ancient Near East and other cultures, humans were always made to serve the needs of the gods. The gods, and this is explicit, they'll be like the gods are tired of making their own food and drink, and so they make humans to be their slaves. Another reason why they do it, they'll say, I'll get ahead of myself. The point is, they're there to serve the gods. In Genesis, that's not, of course, at all. So in Genesis, the exact opposite. God provides the food. The humans don't provide the food to God. And this little thing, but it matters, and it creeps up in our theology a lot. That's why you'll probably never hear me say, I never say that we serve God. I never say that in prayers or sermons or prayers or whatever. Because we don't serve God. We serve God's needs. We serve God's will, but we don't serve him because God has no needs. When my wife serves me, she serves me. I got needs and wants, and she does both. Like I need to eat and need a hug, and I'm the object of that. I can get it, But there are times I have a need, or maybe I'm sick and she gives me medication and so forth. She serves my needs. Serving my will is if I said, please get me my medication, then she brings it. Well, God has no, he has a will. So a better analogy might be to say, Roger Wall is the lead. Uh, he is the president of all things fixing in all of Henry County, really the state, and he rules over everything. This is true story. And they say, "Well, I serve Roger." You go, "But do you?" "Yes, I serve Roger." "No, I don't." "Well, really?" So on the first day on the job, me and Jennifer talking and say, "You work for Roger?" "Oh yeah, I do." "What do you do?" "Well, I cut this grass." "Well, is it his grass?" "Well, no." "Well, you don't really serve Roger, right?" "Well, no. I mean, he's so far above me. He's way up there as the ruler of all things cleaning and fixing and everything. And so you serve his needs, right? He's the CEO, right? That's right. So in that sense, that's what Christians mean by that. And so that's what the gods. So the gods make humans and other creation stories to be. That's not at all what. But there's some hints to it. They nod their head to it. We'll see later on Genesis 2, because Adam and Eve's function is to basically take care of the garden of God. That's what that garden, and we'll talk about that garden. It's not a flower garden, it's more like a fruit garden. But anyway, so God is the giver of food in Genesis. He's not the receiver of it. We were not made to make sure God has food to eat. That doesn't make any sense. So it's very different. Other thing is very different is, of course, male and female. And in the Hebrew, it's male and female. Little footnote for you New Testament nerds like myself. You remember, does it sound like something Paul said? There's neither slave nor free nor, right? And it's not, Paul does not, in Galatians, he says it correctly because he knows he's a Hebrew thinker. He does not say, and everybody gets this wrong in the church, he doesn't say male or female. He says they're neither male and female. So he always quotes directly straight from Genesis 1:28. The point is, this male and female go together, and it's always male and female. And it's in the Hebrew, it's ish ishah, ish ishah. You can hear that how similar that sounds. Ish for male, and then ishah, and ah makes it feminine. So ish ishah, that's it. So there's just two halves. That's all it is. There's nothing in the Hebrew or in the vocabulary, nothing that demonstrates superiority or inferiority. That will come after they sin later on at the end of Genesis 2 and the beginning of 3. It is not in Genesis 1. There's no ish, ishah, it's male and female. And it does not mean when they're holding hands together, now they're able to rule. The point is, humankind acts as God's viceroys to rule over the earth. Not males only, and not females only. In a culture where it's just overwhelmingly patriarchal, boy, that stands out. So women. Okay. What else? I did that. I said that. Okay. The image of God, as I said before, differentiates all other being creatures, living creatures, all other living creatures. Later on in chapter 9, verse 6, after the flood, they'll come out and say you can't kill humans who are made in the image of God, and so it distinguishes them because they're different from other animals. But this is very different. Hopefully I'm making for you a good Christian application right now. In the Jewish and in Christian view, that humans have a particular function, a role given by God, is distinct, not unique, but it is distinct in the world's religions and world's philosophies. Jews share this view, and of course Muslims do as well. But in general, almost every other person in any philosophy or religion disagrees with them. They do not hold to the view that you and I as humans have a special role to play amongst all the living creatures. They do not think that. I cannot overemphasize why this is so important. It impacts an enormous amount of ethical decisions that humans make. And one of them is one involving abortion. One of the number one arguments, one of the number one, and I've done an enormous amount of research on this for years and years and years, and I found about 3 big major arguments in support of killing babies in utero. And the number one argument, and it goes in different flavors, but it basically comes down to what we call a functional argument. And so it's things like this. Well, the baby can't think, or the baby can't feel, the baby can't get a job, the baby can't read or write, the baby can't breathe, the baby can't. Whenever you say the baby can't, well, they don't say baby. They're going to say that clump of cells fetus, which fetus in Latin just means baby. So this is constant word games. So, okay, so they'll say that, I'll say that baby because that's what it is. The baby inside the womb can't blank. Whenever you say that, you're making a functional argument of why it is not a moral issue to kill that thing, that clump of cells. In the Christian worldview, that is disgusting because Christians believe that humans don't have value because of their function in the world. They believe they have value because God said you are different from all the other creatures. You're different. You have a role to play that other animals don't have. And so our value is not based on whether or not we can do something in society to get a job, read and write, and so forth. It's because we, unlike all the other animals, are in the image of God. Another big thing comes down to ethical issue is whether or not Christians have to be vegetarians, or whether or not there's things like that, right? So, and they'll say, of course, because, and I remember I had a student in one of my classes who was real big on vegetarian, and we had a discussion about this in ethics class, and she goes, well, they're just like us. And I go, no, they are not. Well, no, I said, no, everything about what you're saying is not Christian. The Bible is from beginning, pick any Bible you want, from beginning to end, Old and New Testaments, is a fundamental belief that other animals and humans are not the same, which means we do not have the same moral responsibility toward other animals that we have toward humans. And everybody knows that when you've been influenced by Christianity, because we made up an adjective for it: humane or inhumane. That's assuming a Judaic Christian value system that pagans or non-Christians and do not share, which is ironic because they will use the term. That's inhumane to treat dogs that way. Huh. Tell me more what that word means to you. You assume there's a moral obligation I have towards dogs that is just like I have toward fellow humans. The Christian worldview, that is abjectly false. Does that mean, therefore, Christians are going to beat all the dogs? Of course not. It means I don't have the same moral obligation. But people don't see it that way in general. Non-Christians do not see it that way, and a lot of Christians don't see it that way. Little footnote, Dennis Prager, who's he's a Jewish commentator, he's spoken for years and years and years at different places, and he'll go around, he said, always ask the same question. If you were walking by and two beings were drowning, a dog and a man, who would you save? He said, every time, across the board, no matter where I ask the question, by far the number one answer is the dog. Absolutely. Little footnote, because I'm a nerd this way, I love it. In movies, there's unspoken rules you cannot break. And that you can't. You can say the most foul, you can watch people eat poop, you can see heads chopped off, you can do everything. Dustin loves those movies. You can do everything. You cannot show a baby get hurt, and you cannot show an animal get hurt. They will never, ever greenlight that film, or it will never happen, ever, because there's a greater affinity towards them than there are humans. I'll give you another example, and I'll stop. I'm saying this because I'm telling you, this actually matters for our sense of ethics and what values. Years ago, I watched a documentary. I'm kidding, Dustin like those movies, by the way. I love Dustin. You're like, who's this nasty psychopath who keeps talking? It's not this guy. It's it's his cousin. Years ago, there was a documentary a few years ago of a guy who kidnapped females. It's a long story, but he kidnapped females, and he lived out in this mountainous forest area. I think it was in California. And he would work side jobs helping little film crews do horror movies. And he'd get all these clever ideas. What if this blah, blah, blah? Like, it was real specific. But come to find out of the way, he'd been doing things like this. And this one story, he kidnaps this one woman who had trained in self-defense for a long time. And she was a runner, and he would grab these joggers and then chain them up, literally chain them up to a tree. And then he would keep them alive long enough to get their passwords and so forth, so he would steal their Visa, their debit card, and he would go to the bank and take all their cash and all their stuff for a while to make it look like they're still alive. And then eventually, when they ran out of money, he'd kill them. And so they finally caught the guy, and they were talking about this one particular female he did at this one particular time. She also had a dog with her. Well, he gets her, and he goes, yeah, she put up quite a fight. But yeah, eventually I got her out. He goes, well, I chained her up, I chained her up. And then what? I did the whole thing I usually do, use the Visa, da-da-da-da-da. And what happens, you're on money? Oh, I kill her. Well, I hit her with a bat, basically, I beat her. He goes, I mean, just as He goes, and then the detective said this, I'll never. Did you kill her dog too? No, no, I could never do that. That is humanity. And I'm saying to you, Christians, please come to grips with if you think the biblical text is authoritative on this issue at all, it should have a consequence to your ethics. And he meant it. I would never. We can't see it in film. So there you go. Every single time a movie comes up and a dog, someone's about to get shot, like, no, they're not going to show it. Humans all day long because they're just despicable. And that's how corrupt it's all become. Okay, that's happy. Well, you're welcome. The point is, this has ethical implications, and it's okay. So, again, the text never suggests God made all of creation for us, but it does say He put it in charge of it. That is, God made it for Himself. God is still God, and like I said, we're the viceroys, vice regents, vice whatever. That's it. Okay, so let's put all this. You'll see this pattern together. That's day 6. So now put this pattern. Look, if you step backwards a little bit. So the celestial bodies, day 4, carry out their functions in the sphere of day and night, which is back in day 1. The birds and the fish, day 5, populate the sphere of the sky and the waters, day 2. The animals and people, day 6, are the denizens, the citizens of dry land, with its vegetation serving as their food, day 3. So you see this pattern that the author of Genesis 1 has deliberately set up. Like I said many times, he puts into function the spaces, and then he populates them. And then he's done. And then there's day 7. So let me pause there before we do day 7. Any questions, comments? Doesn't sink in? And Jennifer says, I still love horses more than you, David. Get over it. I know. And I'm okay with that. I still love you. Please don't kill me, though. If you had to choose between me and a horse, she would literally pause. She'd go. Yeah. What kind of horse? Is it an old horse? She might be more primed to do it. It's old. He's got, okay, horse. Jen, please. Look, but it's a horse. Do you need a horse? Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there's a whole thinking. And no, she'd show up in church. I was there. We almost lost the horse. We almost lost it. And everybody would go, I understand. I've done the same thing. I mean, if that was my horse, if that were my dog, David's out. Okay, chapter 2, verse 1, which is such a horrible way to demarcate this. This is ridiculous. It should be chapter 1, verse 29, 30. I mean, it should just keep going on. So nevertheless, as usual, in your translations, that's a long story, don't let your chapter and verses make you forget the whole thought unit, because he's not done yet. And the skies and the earth and all their array. In Hebrew, all their array, is that your translation? It really is all their hosts. And that's the same Hebrew word that's often used for armies. All the objects he makes. So all the skies and the earth and all those objects or bodies in the skies were finished. And that's the Hebrew word, finished, ceased, done. Everything's set into place. And in the 7th day, God finished his work that he had done and ceased in the 7th day from all his work that he had done. And God blessed the 7th day and made it holy because he ceased in it from doing all his work which God had created. Now, in Hebrew, it is finished or ceased. It is not rested. It's not. You can say rested sometimes in Hebrew, but the problem with us in American English is rested typically means chillax, right? Just relax. It's what Lance did when he got a job here. Just sit back, put his feet up, and rested. So I've been picking on Dustin. I got left or right. I could do something. He looked at his wife and said, "No, that's not true. I didn't rest, honey. I didn't do. I didn't true." He said, "Did you? Are you serious? Are you resting, honey?" It's finished. It's stopped. It ceased. It ceased. Now notice he makes this day holy, kadosh. Holy is this singular, powerful quality that certain objects and places and persons acquire. It's a you go like Leviticus 19, where things are holy. Spoons can be holy. This is it. It's a long subject because it's always taught incorrectly in churches. Always they associate holiness with morality, being a good person, doing the right thing. Sometimes that is implied in the text, but that's not what holy means. Holy is very difficult to define. It's something like God's quality. It's a quality of God that makes it not mundane, from mundate in Latin, meaning of common. So sometimes people say David doesn't mean separate. Yeah, it's not just that it's separate. It's a quality about it that separates it from all the other things that are not God kind. And this analogy kind of works, but it's like saying it's radioactive. Now, several things can be radioactive, but let's assume for a second. What's that? What's Superman's kryptonite, right? So let's assume for a second, green kryptonite. So let's assume for a second it's kryptonite. So if it's kryptonite in the series, as we said, the red, that's right, not a red kryptonite. So if it's a green kryptonite from the planet Krypton, you know where it came from, you know it has an effect and so forth. It's kind of like that. The point is, if you're in the presence of kryptonite, you know the source. It's associated only with one place in all the universe. Well, that's what holy is. Holy has a quality about it that only comes from one source. And I mean only one source, and that's God. It's the thing that it's a way of saying God's not like the rest of us. So in that sense, it's like separate. It's like fine china. It's separate. We bring out the paper plates for me, but fine china for Valerie, because it's. You might say, and if we say that today, we might say, why do you set it aside? Because it's special. It's different, and we make a whole cabinet that I had to buy because my wife said you have to have. I love her. This special paper plates. That's what they are. They're fancy paper. Anyway, so it's God kind. And what he's saying here is, I mean, spoons can be kadosh. They're holy. They're not moral. That's a good spoon. You did a good job. That spoon's going to heaven. Spoons don't go to heaven. They're objects. And so altars in the Old Testament, Leviticus 19, altars, they're holy. They've been splattered with holy blood because that's been given to God. Okay, now he's saying this day is set aside to God. The day is not morally good. God's saying it's now holy. It's set aside. Now, why is that? And this is the why is about to. This is why, and we'll finish up on this today because the why matters. Are you with me so far? Yes. Okay. So why does it matter? Well, here's the deal. It matters because of two things: time itself, and then what I'll say more in a second is what happens on day 7. What happens on day 7. So I'm going to unpack those two things. So one is on time. The person or editor or editors who put together Genesis 1 into chapter 2, a few verses here, they almost certainly were a group of people of priests. And so for them, the pinnacle, the last day is what they will call eventually Shabbat or Sabbath. The seventh day. The seventh day is the pinnacle. They love sevens. They love sevens. Now, I haven't said this. I waited to the end because I don't know if you noticed this or not. Jeff Morrow is a scholar. He notices this. So listen to these sevens. See if you notice any of these. In Hebrew, I know you've been noticing the Hebrew Valley, but okay. In Hebrew, Genesis 1:1 contains 7 words. Genesis 1:2 has 14 words. That's 2 times. Thank you. Thank you, Becky. 2 times 7 is 14 people. All these Kiwani High people. Okay. And God occurs 35 times, which is 5 times, in the 7-day account. The terms earth occur 21 times, that's 3 times. Heaven/firmament, 21 times, 3 times, 7. The phrase, and it was so, appears 7 times, as well as the phrase, God saw that it was good, 7 times. The important words light and day are found 7 times in the first, we might call natural paragraph. There are 7 references to light in the 4th paragraph. And this section dealing with the creation of animals, the Hebrew word for living beings occurs 7 times. In the 7th paragraph, which deals with the 7th day, there occurs 3 consecutive sentences that each contain 7 words and the phrase 7th day in the center. Moreover, the Hebrew words in the 7th paragraph total 35, which is 5 times 7. I wonder if there's a theme. So 7, 7, 7, 7. So the point is, on one way you focus on that, if you focus on time, then the pinnacle is that end result is dividing time to 7 periods and 7 periods. Now what's interesting is that? Oh my goodness. We thought she moved. Oh, you're leaving right now? Oh. Sarah's moving to Florida. No. We love you, Sarah. Glad to see you. Glad to see you. Yes. Oh, good question. Uh, we won't talk about, yeah, so do Christians celebrate Sabbath? I'm going to go there. Very good question. That is a good question because I think it's a good question. Good. Now, real quickly, dividing time into 7-day periods, as far as we can tell, was never happened in any culture in the ancient world. Nobody did this. There were particular days of the month. Mesopotamians considered holy, yeah, and they consider unlucky. Certain days are unlucky. They're often 7 days apart, like the 7th day of the month, 14th day of the month. But as far as we know, no other ancient culture whatsoever had a 7-day period. Only the Jews did. And then, for example, Israel's Shabbat, Sabbath, was not celebrated on certain days of the month like the Egyptians and Mesopotamians. No. And it wasn't linked to the cycles of the moon or to any other cycle of nature. It was just every 7th day. So as far as we can tell, in the world, in the ancient world, only Jews said every 7th day is a special day. Everyone said, well, there's special days lined up when that star does that. No, no, no. Every 7 days. So here, the emphasis probably is on this time issue. So Leviticus 19:30 and 26, observe my Shabbats, my Sabbath, and have reverence for my sanctuary. I am Yahweh. So in this sense, Sabbath or Shabbat is by observing this human Sabbath, people give reference to the divine Sabbath. So the idea of this case, if the big pinnacle of 7 is about time, which is probably chiefly true, I'm going to add a second one in a second. The first major point is today is holy. I told you because why? Because of time. And this is the day that God sets up as his time to stop from work. And that 7 is a very powerful day. And so later on, when the Jews said, you need to do it too, when God says, observe my Shabbat, he's saying, do what I'm doing. That is, when you do it, it's because I'm doing it. Notice also in Genesis 2, we're still in day 7. It doesn't repeat. That is, we're still in Shabbat. We're still in Sabbath. And that's because of he's stopping from work. And that leads to the second point. The second point is this. No, let me pause here for 1 second and answer your question because I might go back later, depending on how much time we have today. So back to your question is, let me say it this way. So in Judaism, Sabbath or Shabbat to this very day is still Friday night to Saturday night. It's sunset to sunset. still is. Christians do not have a Shabbat or Sabbath. Sunday has never been considered Sabbath in the church. I've heard that preached. I've heard that assumed. I've seen whole books on that. They're profoundly wrong. At no point in the church did they say, now Christians have a Sabbath. It seems to have been the case that Christians met on the first day of the week, all the way back to the Corinthians. They call it Kyriake, the Lord's Day. And we're not exactly sure why they did it. It might have something to do with his resurrection, the empty tomb being found on a Sunday morning, which is their first day of the work week for them, for a Jew. And that's why that's the case. But we're not told that's why they do it. But it probably is why the earliest Christians met what we would call Monday morning. It's the first day of the week, the work week. But for them back then, that was Sunday. They called it something else back then. We call it Sun's Day because the day of the sun. Well, that's all. See, I'm sorry. See, I just nerd out forever. Okay, so Christians did not make Sunday a new Sabbath. It was a separate day to meet as Christians to celebrate the resurrection of Jesus and his teachings and so forth. Sabbath, Shabbat, has always, for probably 3,000 years at least, been a Jewish day all the way back to Leviticus 19 when it says to observe my Shabbat. And so, well, David, does that mean Christians shouldn't rest sometimes? Well, sure, great. Yep, absolutely. And I would argue for that and say we ought to do that. It's just that Sunday is not a day of Shabbat. It is not. It is not. In general, it is because it means in general you don't work. And the problem is I sin every Sunday. I work. I'm on the clock. Every Sunday. Thank you, brother. All of y'all are observing it if you don't go to work. And that's in general what happens. The whole weekend was because of Jews and Christians in medieval in Europe. They gave the Jews their Friday to Saturday, and so ended up Saturday being off for them. And then Sunday was taken off because they didn't work too. So technically speaking, Sunday is not a Christian Sabbath. Sabbath is a Jewish holiday that's from Friday night to Saturday night. Sunday, they call it the Lord's Day, is something a bit different. And it is a bit different because we don't go back to Leviticus to figure out what to do on a Sunday. I bet all of you in here at some degree cook meals on a Sunday. Well, you shouldn't if it's a Sabbath. You should have prepared all your meals yesterday before the sunset. And Greta said, I did do that. Okay, well, good for you. Yeah, go ahead, please. Yeah, you had read that Constantine arbitrarily changed that. Yes, I haven't heard that before. I don't. Constantine didn't have the authority to change. Mm, mm. Yeah, interesting. So yeah, Valerie's saying, and I've also read that people who are upset. I believe that I can see that. I can see how some people are upset that no, they think that God's upset that it's been moved and that Constantine did it and it should be on Sabbath. It should be a Saturday. Yeah, it's just this, I have no reason to think Constantine did any of the thing that said. I've never heard that in my life, and that says something. I'm not omniscient, but PhD in historical theology. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, I don't have any scholar that would suggest Constantine ever. That just didn't. Yes, ma'am. You can look it up. Yeah. Yeah, I don't find that persuasive at all. And then secondly, I would say is what possible reason would we argue that God's upset because we, again, I just fundamentally say we've not changed Sabbath. Yeah, that's good. I'm kind of thinking out loud. Yeah, I would say, yeah, I don't, yeah. Sunday's just not Sabbath. It's a day of celebrating the resurrection of Jesus and other things. It's just not Sabbath. It's not a day. I mean, in general, it is for the average Christian because most people don't go to work. They work Monday through Friday. But in that sense, most people have two Sabbaths. You don't go to work. And that's what Jews do. They didn't work that day. They didn't go to the harvest. They didn't go to the field. Now you farmers do. And I've heard this too, that farmers, that some say if you don't go to church or work, God's not going to bless your crop or something. Is that true? I've heard that before. I've heard there's a sentiment among certain farmers that if you don't do anything at work, yeah, God won't bless the crop and all. I mean, okay, okay. That sounds very Jewish to me, but okay, but I'm not a Jew. I'm not a practicing Jew. I'm a practicing Christian. And so there you go. Again, yeah, that's good. Yeah, so that's my view. Good question. I don't think at all. I don't call it Sabbath. I call it Sunday. That's it. Seventh Day Adventist. Oh, that's exactly right. They do. They sure do. I fundamentally disagree with them. Yes, they do. I think they're completely wrong. I do. Seventh Day Adventist. Seven Day. No, it's good. Good. Seventh Day Adventists do not. Seems to me do not come to grips what this with the significance of exactly what Jesus taught and that he died for us and he rose again. And I'm not saying that just because I've been so influenced by Paul, but I have been influenced by Paul. But beyond, if I didn't have Paul, I would still go back to Jesus himself and say, I still think, for example, okay, for example, in the Gospels, people come up to Jesus at various times and say, for example, in Mark 10, what's the greatest commandment, right, in Mark 12? Or Mark 10, good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? What have you done for you? Well, from childhood, I've done this. So there are times in the text where the so-called 10 commandments or the 10 words, they will be mentioned. But of all the 10 commandments, of all in the Gospels, only 9 are reinforced. The 10th one isn't. I wonder what that one is. Shabbat, Sabbath. Jesus never says we ought to have Sabbath. Paul later on explicitly says in Colossians and in Ephesians, he says, and in Romans 2, and Romans 14, some days, they're all days. Some people treat them extra special, but we know they're not. They're just days. For a practicing Jew to say that is crazy different. And that's why his Jews would have called him nutso. Like, what do you think? They're not the same, Paul. Go read Leviticus 19. And Paul would say, now that Jesus has come, yes, they are. Yes, they are. They're all the same. And so I disagree with their view. I just disagree with their view. The Yeah. No, that's good stuff. This is good. So yeah, we do disagree. I've got about 30 seconds. In fact, I'd have exactly 30. So, Red. Well, that happened to Jesus, right? In Mark 2. So the disciples, your disciples plucking the head, and he says, "I'm the Lord of the Sabbath." He didn't say, "Knock it off, disciples. Don't you know what day it is?" All right. Love you.